supposed to take the makers off the table, but it's too late now. Might as well take a sip.
I did not see that coming.
Oh my
it's
God.
the lore. It's the mystique of it all.
We're still doing it. We haven't been cut off yet.
Holy shit.
Good job, buddy.
Nice job, Daniel. Good job, man. Keep that rod bent. Keep that rod bent.
I mean, people used to get so scared of them, they had to shoot them.
Yeah, that's true.
But because you literally can't stop thinking about it. You know, you can't scratch the itch enough. All right, welcome back. Another episode of the Spot Burn Podcast. I'm here with Josh Meltzer in the studio and a special guest from the southern capital of the musky world. We got Scott Barrett. He's from the E. Minor Clark Fish Hatchery right on Cave Run Lake. I think I got that right. If I got it wrong, he's going to correct us. But Scott, man, thanks for joining. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, it's a Minor E. Clark Fish Hatchery.
Minor E. Clark Fish Hatchery. There you go. Almost. Close is only good hand grades and horseshoes, as they say.
That's it.
Well, sweet, man. We're excited to have you. So Scott and I met. You had actually reached out when Jen and I were last April. We kind of our last hurrah before we had our first child. We went down to Cave Run for about a week, and we got hooked up with you. And we got a sweet tour of the hatchery, and it was very cool. Very cool. So that's kind of how we met. And now we're here doing a podcast, which is sweet. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Glad to have you guys in. It just so happened I saw where you guys were down on your story, and I'm like, well, they're at Cave Run. We had Musky in the building then, Fry at the time, if I remember correctly. And I was like,
Sure did.
Reached out to you guys and said, you want to get a slow day or a rainy day or something, you want to get off the water for a little bit, come by and check us out. So glad we had some fish in to be able to show you guys in.
Never seen more muskies in my entire life, Scott.
That's it. That was a bunch of them. They weren't very big, but you got to see a bunch anyway.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully be able to share some of that. I have some footage from that, so we'll share that when this episode comes out. But I guess let's start with, how did you get into this? What's the short story on how you ended up here at the hatchery? Kind of the personal background. I'd love to hear a little bit of your story.
Yeah, man, I grew up, I didn't play sports. I played in the creek, and fish have been a big part of my life ever since I've been big enough to walk. It's been my love, my passion. I've always loved all things aquatic, and that kind of started the ball rolling. I was fortunate enough to be raised in a family of anglers. My grandpa was a musky angler. My dad is a fisherman, a multi-species guy, some musky fishing. And then myself, and then my son. He's on his way. So, but grew up around it, in a small town, and grew up in the headwaters of the Kentucky River there on the South Fork. Started out pond hopping and wade fishing in the creek, and then in the river there. Smallmouth fishing was kind of my first love stream smallmouth, and then the muskies were there as well, and that kind of came along and just fascinated fish. They're the fish of all the local folklore and everything. That's what everyone talks about. Muskie. It's a big deal when you caught one, and that kind of started me down the path of fishing, and I never looked back. And then when I went to college, that's kind of what I was interested in, and going down that avenue. And I went to EKU and received a bachelor's degree in wildlife management there, and came out of there dual certified for wildlife and fisheries, just to kind of broaden my horizon. And started seasonally, actually, while I was working on my master's at Eastern. I started seasonally here just to gain some experience with the department. And when after my first summer here, a biologist position opened up, which I was already qualified for with my degree that I had. So I put in, was hired, and I've never looked back. I've been here for going on 17 years now. So I live right here on site at Minor E. Clark. Yeah, so still here, and hopefully I'll be here for a minute.
What's your role at today?
I'm a fisheries biologist here. There's 3 residents here that stay on site. We have a manager and 2 biologists, and we live here at the hatchery. There's in one of the 3 houses, and because in the summer we're spawning season on through summer, we got to be around. So we're here, and all hours of the night and morning, checking on DO and other things, and fish when they ripen up and stuff. So we kind of got to be close. So they put us up here,
Gotta
and
keep
yeah.
Nice. That's a good gig.
Oh yeah, it's perfect.
Besides muskies, Scott, what other fish species does the hatchery raise?
Musky is our big one. We actually take eggs from. We strip spawn those along with walleye, and we do 2 strains of walleye here at Minor Clark. We have the Erie strain, which is the northern strain. We use those in a lot of our reservoirs, and we have a native strain, a southern river strain walleye that we've been producing for ever since I've been here. Genetically, it's different. Looking at it, it's kind of hard to tell. There's no really good heuristics to look at them and eyeball them. We have to take a fin clip and verify the genetic integrity of the fish before we spawn those. But we have a pretty good idea based on the watershed they come out of, but we still double check. And we produce those as well. Those are the only 2. We actually take eggs from the females. We also do largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, striped bass, hybrid striped bass. We've done crappie, both whites and blacks, depending on the stocking demands from other biologists across the state. And then we grow a bunch of forage in the form of fathead minnows and goldfish, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
Interesting.
Pretty diverse hatchery.
Yeah, and I think we definitely want to dig in quite a bit to that because you guys are doing some cool, unique things. And but first, I guess talk to us about the history of muskies in Kentucky. I think, are they native, and how did we get to the point? Kind of get us up to modern day at the hatchery right on Cave Run. But what's that? What's the history behind some of the muskie culture and the fishing?
The muskie have been here, always been here. I can take you to some of the, like my local sportsman's club where I'm from. There's some heads back in the day, from I think the earliest dated one that I've seen on the wall is 1937, and and right on up through. And but they've been here. There's a rich culture in eastern Kentucky and these rivers and small creeks. And that's where those remnant populations of muskie kind of thrived, so to speak, through all the years to kind of endure up until the hatchery was here in 1970. And I think the first actual stocking of fish was here at Cave Run after the hatchery got in. The first designated stocking of muskie wasn't until 1973. And that's just after the hatchery was built here. And those went to Cave Run. I think it was around 1,000 fingerlings. I'm not sure the size we got those to, but that was the first designated stocking here. But there's some natural reproduction here, very limited though. Since I've been with the department, I can recall only 2 instances where we've seen some natural reproduction, and those are both been in some of our smaller streams that we saw that. So everything else is supplemented by hatchery-grown fish.
Sure. And what do you think? What was the prompting for why did Kentucky say, "Hey, we want to build a hatchery and start stocking muskies"? Was that a pressure from the anglers as it was gaining popularity, or where was that coming from?
I'm not so sure it was the pressure from the anglers. I think it was the foresight of some of the early biologists with the agency. They saw that they had something here, and they had a really good opportunity to preserve it and even make it better than what it was. And, in that time, muskie were really popular. They were a popular food fish. I mean, harvest was almost 100% when one was caught, and if they didn't get a little bit of help, they were going to be in trouble and maybe even extirpated from the area, So with the thoughtfulness of the early age, Dan Brewer was actually the first hatchery manager here, and he did a lot. If you look back at a lot of the old muskie research and looking at habitat and production, he kind of laid the footprint down for us to be able to do what we're able to do today in terms of defining, muskie habitat and kind of putting the recipe together for success with our muskie propagation program.
That makes sense. And since you've been involved, it's gone to new heights. You guys are now, Cave Run's recognized as just like a world-class fishery, size, beauty. what contributed to that other than just stocking more fish? Was there something specific
The cool thing about that is, the stocking rate's not really changed for a lot of years. Cave Run, for example, gets 2,700 fish a year. That's what it doesn't always get those, depending on production and other issues that have happened within the last 4 or 5 years. We've had some hiccups there, but the musky fishery here has been is even better now, in my opinion, than it ever has been. Got better water quality, and I think a lot of that's due in part. I've got some krill data here that you guys will find really interesting. We can talk about at some point, but and a lot of it's through catch and release. To be honest with you, the numbers that's kind of supplemented through. I think that's had to have a major effect on the numbers here in the lake, because as I'll tell you here in a minute, I mean, harvest is a very minute factor of musky fishing anymore now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. I think as anglers, we'd love to hear about that, and I also think it'll, what the survey data shows is going to kind of highlight the state of Cave Run or the state of the Kentucky fisheries.
Yeah.
So whatever you're willing to share on that would be awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can go into that right now if you want to. But the last krill,
Fire away.
I've got krill from 93, and I'll compare the two krills. We do a krill on Cave Run every 5 years, so I've got krill back to 93 here, and then the last krill here was done in 2019. It's due for another krill survey this year. But the cool thing about this was that in 93 there were 8,000 trips to Cave Run for muskie. All right, in 2019 we had 13,000 trips for muskie.
Wow.
And the harvest rate in 93 was 48%. And this was when the lake was, and mind you, it was under a 30-inch minimum at that time as well. But the harvest rate in 2019, which was a 36-inch minimum, was 3%. So 93, it was 48%. In 2019, it was 3%. So you can tell me there's not been a major culture change there in the way muskie are viewed by anglers and the value that are put on those fish. I mean, that's pretty astronomical. And another cool factor is of the 3% that were harvested, none of them were under 40 inches. So they were all 40 inches. So that led us to the now 40-inch minimum that's on our reservoirs. That was one of the factors that helped contribute to that, because they weren't being utilized under 40. Nobody was keeping them anyway. So it was easy for us to bump that up to 40 without ruffling any feathers or bothering anybody. So that was a no-brainer in terms of going to the 40.
That was recently, right, Scott? That was like in the last few years that got changed.
Yep. Yep. Just happened. So
very cool. What do you think that bodes? Do you think the future necessitates growing that even more, or will that happen, or is it in a pretty good spot right now?
Not sure. I think you're in a pretty good spot with a 40 here for us, and the natural history of our fish. 40 inches, who knows? But we got to wait and see what that's going to do in terms of, because we're still stocking, 2,700 of these in there a year. So it's going to be interesting to get the data down the lines to see, how they're looking, how the health of the fish are looking, hoping we don't, stockpile a bunch of fish up, and we may even have to reduce stocking, who knows, but it'll be something that we're definitely going to be watching and trying to keep our eye on and for future decisions.
Yeah. Interesting. How has top end size changed? I mean, from an outside perspective looking in, it's a huge fishery, lots of forage, long growing season. I think what's the state records out of there from like 2008, I believe.
Yeah, it's like 08. It was 47 pounds, 54-inch fish. Yeah, it was a giant. And that fish was.
How have you seen any of that change? Well, go ahead, finish that. Sorry.
That fish was 14 years old at the time. It was actually one of the recipients of a fin clip, so we knew exactly what year that fish was stocked in. So that was kind of cool. 14-year-old girl, Sarah Terry was her name. She caught it, so it's pretty neat deal. But
I've heard about that story. I believe. Yep. Yeah, that's crazy. How do you guys view from? I guess kind of two parts. As a biologist, kind of indebted and working on the system, and as an angler, how do you view the importance of trophy size, and how has that changed or evolved over time at Cave Run? Are they getting bigger? Are you seeing that kind of topping out, or is the future looking pretty good there?
I don't think that it's changed a ton as far as the overall size. Our fish have a lifespan of about 15, 16 years tops, and that low 50s, I think, is kind of going to be our top end, that 52. The biggest muskie I've ever put my hands on in sampling was 52 inches. And it actually came out of the river. So I think that's your upper end. I'm not going to say there's not a chance one could get bigger. You never know. And it's probably out there, but I think that's on the upper end. And as far as big fish around, I think there's several still around in the system. A lot of 50+ inch fish around.
That's a trophy fishery here in Wisconsin. So that's pretty sweet. That's pretty sweet. Talk to us about, I remember you saying something about the strain that you guys are working with, and that it is a native Kentucky strain. I might have got that wrong, but talk to me about that. Is that true? And I think that's pretty cool that you guys have been able to preserve that. So
yeah, that's one of the things that we've done right. And again, goes back to my predecessors here, Dan, and some of the other biologists that were here. Those guys, to hear some of the stories and using some of the equipment they had, the electrofishing gear they had, it's nothing like what we have now. And they spent days shocking and looking for just one or two females up after the lake was impounded up in some of the far reaches up in the lake, and would get them and transport them back here and spawn them. But yeah, the strain of muskie we have is still that original Licking River, that southern strain muskie. We've never strayed from that, and it's actually one of the things we got really, really right with our muskie. We've not introduced any genetics from out of state. Everything's has been local here, and we've been able to get enough brood and be able to keep that going, which is awesome. The fish do great. I always say nothing's going to do better than what you have there. As far as genetics goes, what's naturally found in the system is probably going to do better there than anything else, and we've been able to do that with muskie. So it's pretty cool.
Not something that most muskie fisheries. The state of Wisconsin cannot say that about its muskies,
right?
No.
So that's really sweet. Kind of the last true, genetic link to the original state of muskies.
It's and we've not done that with some other species, but muskies luckily has been one that we've kept pure, which is pretty cool. We diluted our walleye, gene pool unknowingly at the time. This was back when a walleye was a walleye, and which has not been the end of the world. We've been able to kind of go with that program and expand that and keep waters that have not really been diluted genetically, and trying to keep those going and getting them to take off. But it's been a challenge with that. And then as technology advances, genetics play such a big role in fish production, and it's crazy. Everything's going wide open now, so it's pretty interesting times.
Does the Minery Clark Hatchery serve other states besides Kentucky as well?
We have a really good relationship with most other DNRs around. It's a pretty good community in terms of, sharing. We don't sell anything, but if we have surplus of something that another state can use, we get on the horn and be like, hey, we got, 500,000 of this, extra that we're not going to use. If you guys can use them, come get them, So that's been one of the coolest things working with the hatchery and seeing how all the hatcheries around, we all kind of work with one another. We've given muskie at one point, Ohio, we would give them eggs because of the USDA stuff. They couldn't take live fish, but they could take eggs from us. They haven't gotten anything from us in a few years, but we gave them eggs. Southern Illinois have gotten muskie from us too. West Virginia's gotten muskie from us, fry. Typically, we've had been in a trade with Tennessee for striped bass for several years. When we've got muskie, we'll give them to them. they've been supplying us with striped bass when we've not had any surplus muskie to give them for several continuous years. So they take care of us in terms of that. So without them, we wouldn't have any striped bass production because we don't have a good place to pick up brood fish, you know. So it's a good network.
Very cool. I want to kind of split this into two parts, and I think we want to dig in quite a bit now on the hatchery and the operations and rearing muskies, and then secondly, kind of come back around and talk a little bit about like how your experience as a biologist has helped you as an angler and what other anglers might be able to learn from that. But I think first, what I'm so excited to talk to you about and learn from, Scott, and share with people is what you guys are doing down there from a muskie rearing perspective. And I think part of that reason is when you look at the state of muskies in Wisconsin, especially the state of our hatcheries, we were once recognized as kind of the pinnacle of this, and the future's a little bleak. And I don't mean to sound alarmist, but we've had hatcheries close. We've had multiple years in a row now where these hatcheries aren't able to produce muskies. And then meanwhile, those hatcheries are funded effectively by our hunting license fishing or our hunting license sales, which are on a decline. So the budgets are down. These operations are in massive need of updates that they are not getting. And it's just kind of a sorry state. And I didn't get that vibe at all from talking with you and getting to visit the hatchery down there. And I don't want you to have to stick out your neck in this conversation of comparing Kentucky hatcheries to Wisconsin hatcheries. I'll be the one, I'll be the punching ball on that one. But I wanted to set that context because I think through the lens of what you guys have done, there's probably a lot we could learn for other muskie hatcheries out there. So kind of with all of that background being said, just take us through kind of how does a hatchery work when it comes to muskies? Where does it start? And what do we ultimately get to, and kind of all the trials and tribulations that go into getting that done?
You know, first off, I'm going to say like all the hatcheries across the whole southeast, eastern part of the United States, when you get together at a meeting and everyone starts talking, we all are having some of the same problems as far as like what you're talking about. Funding is a constant worry. Budget's a constant worry, you know, and muskie are very expensive fish to raise just based on their food needs and such. So, but it's, you know, it's changing times. We got, you know, changing weathers. You guys know it's weird now. You know, almost don't know when spring is, and that kind of messes fish up, and that's had an effect on their production here in the last few years as well. Just water quality issues and other things. But in terms of us producing muskie, it all starts, we have a fish production plan. We all get together, the biologists across the state, and we plan out our production year as a hatchery for each species and find out what stocking needs, if we've got changes, whatnot, so we know kind of what our target is, which with muskie, it's been pretty constant. We typically need, just for Kentucky stocking, we need 11 to 12,000 fingerling fish. And I'm saying fingerling, I'm talking advanced fingerling. I'm talking 8-inch fish for the first stocking for stream stockings, and then like 13-inch fish for reservoir stockings. That's how big we get them before they leave here. So we start the plan. We end up first starts with brood fish collection. Once we know kind of what our target is for the year, all my brooders here, for the most part, come from the Licking River, which is right here below Cave Run Lake. I'm the one that gets out and collects them. I'll probably start next week if the weather is nice, starting picking a few up to compile. I end up taking usually around 30 fish, you know, pretty even mix of females to male, out of the spillway.
Is that mainly done with nets, electrofishing?
Electrofishing gear. Yep. You know, we take a shocking boat in there and run the spillway over here, and we typically don't have any trouble. I think my best trip, I got 15 in one trip, which is within a river mile stretch right here below the dam. It's normally not that good, but first trip I usually pick up 7, 8, you know, depending on the water flow. And then once we collect those, we mark those fish with a fin clip, a descriptive little clip, so we know those fish came from the river. and or a hole punch. We've done that before in their pelvic fin. And that way, when we're done with them, we can put them back in the river. So that's one of the big misconceptions folks have about when we get muskie. Oh, you're taking them out of the river. Yeah, we are. We're just barring them from the river. They go back. We do not keep those fish. We use them. We've got them here on site for up until the end of April, and then they're released back in the river where we get them. Occasionally, we've had to go to Cave Run and pick up a few if we've had low water years here in the spillway, because you're not getting that run coming up and you're not getting fish going through. But most of our fish come from the Licking River tailwater, from the Licking River right here below the dam. Once we get those, we put them. We've got it's part of the old Licking River channel here at the hatchery. It's a 13-acre oxbow that we got dammed up and we can control the water level in. We put those in there. There's plenty of stuff for them to eat in there. A bunch of gizzard shad, panfish, other things to hold them until we get ready for them the first part of April. So when the water temps get up around 50, go ahead.
So right there, Scott. For folks sticking with us, I thought this was so cool. Look at this on a map, because the way that you guys have set this up, it is just, it's kind of awesome. Just with the lake and the Army Corps Engineers dam and then the hatchery right beneath it and this oxbow like you're talking about, you can see it all right on the map, and it's really sweet. So I just wanted to call that out to folks as they're running along with us. Sorry for the interruption.
It's a really cool facility. I mean, we've got almost 130 acres of water when everything's full here. So we're a really big state-ran hatchery for where we are, But what we do with the oxbow, we've got our fish in there. Water temps are coming up. The big thing with muskie, once you get up around that 50-degree mark, we go in. It's typically the first week of April. As long as we don't have a cold front come through, that can mess with things a little bit. But if we have warming trends in the day, if it's going to be sunny, nice, windy, bump the water temps up in their ponds a few degrees, we go ahead with it. We get in, electrofish those fish from the oxbow. We pull them in, we sex them. We inject them with a carp pituitary right below their pelvic fin. I think we inject both the females and males. The females, I think, get around 3 grams per pound, and let's see, yep, and the males get 1 gram. And then what we do is put them in 1-acre ponds. We divide them by sex. We divide them by the time that they were injected with carp pituitary. And then typically 48 hours post-injection, if you have warming trends, water's warming up through the day, they will begin ovulating and releasing eggs. So we don't check the first fish we inject until 48 hours post-injection. So we get back in the 1-acre ponds that we've moved them into, we shock them again, and we check them. And if they're flowing, we bring them up to the building. We'll have 2 male ponds. We'll have males. We'll do this over a period of 2 days just to broaden our target area, in case we have a flop one day, we'll have a day, maybe, hey, everything's better this day. So we've got 2 male ponds. We'll go in there and we'll shock a bunch of males up out of the pond. We'll hold them in a tank up here in the hatchery. We typically use 3 males per female, and we'll put them in a tank of MS 222, which is just kind of knocks them out. Kind of like the drunk tank. You put them in there and they're in there for 4 or 5 minutes and they start wobbling back and forth and then just belly up, and just makes it easier on the fish, makes it easier on us handling them. It just helps ensure that the fish are not hurt, any more than necessary while we're stripping the eggs from the ovaries. Muskie are really big fish. You would think they would have just a crap load of eggs in them, but that's not the case. I've seen some walleye almost outproduce, a big 40-something inch muskie. So it's pretty wild. But they let you know when they're done. They run out. Just gravity does most of the work into a dry pan. The whole time we're doing this, we've got males over in another tank and a crew extracting the milk from those with a syringe. And we'll use 3 different ones per female just in case we got a dud for genetic diversity and all that. And then once the eggs are done, we add water, stir for 2 minutes with a feather to keep from breaking them up, and then rinse 3 times. After that, we add diatomaceous earth, which is like the gritty stuff in your toothpaste. We add it's a filter powder. Add that in there. That helps take the stickiness off the eggs and keeps them from just sticking to the pan and together. and leave that on them for a minute, rinse 3 times. And then at that point, we let those eggs water harden. It takes about 3 hours. When it first comes out of a fish, it's really soft and really delicate. And then after these things water harden, they're almost like a little airsoft BB. They get really, really tough. And that's one of the reasons we do. A lot of states don't do that. I don't know if it makes a difference in their survival or what, but it seems to help. And we water harden, and then we treat with iodine. That came into play about 10 years ago, thanks to VHS up north. That was one of the practices you could do to help produce it, and we found it helps with that, and along with fungal issues while the eggs are in the jar. We had a reduction in fungus in the jars. They're really bad to fungus up when they're in the hatching jars on the battery. So do that, and then we measure them out from just per fluid ounce. We know roughly how many are in each ounce. Typically, 1,100 to 1,500 per fluid ounce on musky. They're pretty good sized egg, and we figure out how many we need to take. We've taken over 1 million in 2 days, which is not that big of a feat, but we take a lot more than what we need. One, because survival on the musky eggs is not great, so we just kind of want to cover our bases there. And 2, so we've got extra if something happens, somebody else needs them, so we typically take a few more. And that's from maybe 15 females, and typically those 38 to 41, 42-inch females are the best egg producers. And that all goes back to the age structure of our fish. Those are your younger fish. It's not much different than in people or any other animal. Your younger fish are going to have a little better quality egg, and that's what we found. We spawned some of the great big ones, and very poor survival on the eggs out of those. Kind of kept them separate to see, hey, is this some kind of genetic anomaly, or is it just an old fish? And every instance I've seen of that, it's been an old fish, so which is pretty cool.
Interesting.
And eggs hatch, depending on water temperature, you've got 10 to 14 days. They'll eye up, you'll see them. And at that point, what we do, when a few of them start hatching in the jars, we do something called pan hatching. It's when we'll take them, we'll put them in these wash pans, and we'll move them inside into like our crew room. We'll crank the heat up, and they really just start popping like crazy. And we do this to kind of get an even aged fish. So, in the world of fish, if somebody's 12 hours older than their brother, there's a good chance that they're going to eat their brother, So we want to try to get everything as evenly aged as we possibly can. And the pan hatching route kind of helps us achieve that. Once we pan hatch them, they're pretty inactive. They don't do a lot. They're still feeding off their yolk. They're just kind of laying there. They almost look like a larval salamander, so to speak, while they're laying there. Really cool. You can Google some images of musky fry before swim up. And then they're in this state. We put them in tanks. We got this Spontex material in the tanks, and it just gives them something to kind of attach to. Kind of emulates that leaf litter, natural vegetation stuff like in the wild where they would kind of lay, while they were developing and absorbing their yolk. And they're in that state.
With Scott, because this was about the state that they were in when we were down there. Because I remember you pointing that out, and it almost looks like fake weeds that they stick to, and
they're at this stage for about 2 weeks. Can be a little sooner, again, depending on water temperature. And then you come in the building. It's the coolest thing. There'll be 1 or 2 kind of swim up early, and then the next morning you'll walk in, and the whole tank will be right up on the surface of the water. Like once they've absorbed their yolk, they go instantly. They're feeding on zooplankton and things that are in the water supply, which comes from cave runs. So you see them up there darting around feeding. We usually leave them in the building for 2 to 3 days at that age before we stock them into our 1 acre ponds. And in our 1 acre ponds, we've already prepared those. They've had like 35-pound of fathead minnow broodstock put in them, a month and a half ahead of time. So by this time, those fatheads have spawned in the ponds. So when we take the fry and we put them straight in the ponds, they've got minnow fry that they can instantly start feeding on. And once they start that, if they're successful in transitioning on to those minnow fry, man, they never look back. And we feed them tons of minnows, literally. I'm the minnow guy. I get a load of minnows from Arkansas every week. We can't grow enough minnows to keep everything fed that we have here. So we spend, I think our minnow bill, it keeps creeping up. And this is another one of those things that's kind of scary in terms of muskie production. But we're going to be spending about $115,000 just for minnows to hopefully feed this year's class muskie that we're going to be producing. So it takes a lot of food for them.
Yep, the same challenge we have up here in terms of the budget for that too.
Yep.
So a couple questions just before you keep going to kind of the final phase.
Yep.
Fatheads. So up here we're feeding them mainly sucker minnows, but there has been, because of some of these budget issues, pellet fed muskies. And what do you think about that? Have you guys explored that, or want to stay away from that? Keep it as, natural diet as possible. Tell me your thoughts there a little bit.
My experience with pellet reared fish, and I've not been around pellet reared muskie, but you typically produce it's not as, it'll be a very robust offspring, but when the post stocking stuff's what I worry about with those. I know, for example, with largemouth bass, I've seen some pellet reared largemouth, and I mean, they're used to being fed. They hear a noise, and they're stopped at these boat ramps and stuff, and people walk up and they like swarm. It's like this crowd of hungry, bluegill or something at the dock eating bread. And here come these bass, and that's been what I've seen with some pellet reared. Now, I'm not sure about the muskie. I'm not sure I'm betting they probably wouldn't behave in that way, but if we can keep them on natural food, I think that's the best case. And maybe even look at a transition period there. If you have them on pellets, maybe transition them at a hatchery for a short stint on minnows, where they kind of learn to hunt and learn to feed. And they'll take to that really, really quick, I would think. But I'm sticking right now. Our plan is we're sticking on natural forage for as long as possible until budget constraints or something force us to do otherwise.
That's great to hear. And I think this is a message that you're hearing from Scott, you're hearing from me, to anglers out there. Like, this is one of the, at least what our DNR tells us, one of the ways we can get involved as fishing clubs and Muskies Inc. is we need minnows. Help us get minnows. Help us budget and pay for minnows so that we can keep feeding them that as opposed to pellets. So a good area for angling community to bite on. You also talked about the water from Cave Run, and if I believe I'm not mistaken, one of the things that the hatchery does that's very unique is the gravity-fed water system. Could you talk about that a little bit before we jump over into the muskies and ponds and all that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're blessed with very good water quality here from Cave Run. It's an upland reservoir. There's not a whole lot of ag runoff, so you have really good water quality surrounded by the Daniel Boone National Forest here. So we've got really good water quality here. And on the tower there, I don't know how familiar folks are with these upland reservoir type systems, but you have we've got our intakes. It's all gravity fed, which is typically pretty low maintenance for us. We have 3 intakes, so we can mix and match and pull water from different levels depending on temperature needs, depending on dissolved oxygen needs. So having those 3 different intakes on the tower afford us some flexibility in terms of, hey, we need cooler water, we need to cool the ponds down. We can go all bottom port as long as there's enough DO there. If there's not enough DO there, we can mix it with the level, the depth of water that has more admirable oxygen level, and kind of mix and match and monitor. So we're fortunate in that regard. A lot of hatcheries depend on wells and pumps and other things, and we don't have that issue here. So that affords us
we have that issue. We could learn a thing or two. And correct me if I'm wrong, but part of this is it allows you to do a better job at the hatchery, at the rearing fish level, but it also is more budget friendly, correct? Like, in terms of having to operate.
It's essentially free. I mean, in terms, we go up there and we turn we do maintenance every so often. I think we had some rust issues with some of the actual valves that open up, and that was pretty pricey to replace, but they should be good for several years. But in terms of not having to run pumps and other things, that's just a drop in the bucket. So, but yeah, it's really, really nice. And, that was built while the lake, the lake was finished in 69. So the hatchery was finished up not long after. So while they were building Cave Run, all that was plumbed in ahead of time, so, what happens
It'd be
if,
quite expensive after the fact. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. So they had that foresight, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very cool.
That's really sweet. Okay. I'll shut up and let you keep going. You were taking us from fry into ponds before we talked about gravity fed water.
Yeah. So we typically we varied in our acres of production for muskie. We've been as low as 5 ponds. We bumped it back up to 9 the last few years. And the reason so is this is where we've ran into issues. We've had this survival gap from fry to fingerling. And we're at 9 ponds. We stock around 11,500 fry per pond, per surface acre here at the hatchery. And it's been one of those things that, we have a pond or two out of the 9 that absolutely just carry production for the whole years. And then you'll have 3-4 ponds that completely flop. And you may get just a handful of muskie out of. And that's been a common, just in recent years, that's been something we've been experiencing. So we're keeping our number of ponds up. We're contributing that to aging ponds, the higher nutrient load in our earthen ponds that we've been using, as well, and that's leading to a lot of blue-green algae issues in terms of, that's one thing that we have found with musky fry. If you have blue-green starting in a pond, pre-fry stocking of musky, just don't use it, and because they're not going to do well. And we've been able to jump around and kind of get ahead of that. Last year, we made a switch last minute and pulled some ponds out that had a pretty nasty green bloom going early, or blue-green bloom going early, and we backed up and punted and had some other ponds with minnows and rearranged some pond assignments, and we're able to make that work, and that helped. But that's kind of been our nemesis in recent years, in my opinion, is the blue-green algae blooms. And, it goes with warmer temps. Water quality is not as good and as it was in those ponds due to age, and it's just something we're having to kind of stay on our toes about and adapt and use less fertilizer and different things to try to alleviate those problems with those ponds and that water quality. But if everything goes right, we'll have several thousand. You hardly ever get over 50% survival in a 1 acre pond. A really good pond would be 4,000 to 5,000 of those make it, would be an exceptional musky pond. And I say make it to, 7-8 inches in July. And at that point, we go through and we harvest all of our musky ponds, and we use that size class fish to do our stream stocking. And we take and reduce the densities in some other ponds that we prepared and move the ones we're going to use for reservoir stocking to those ponds and continue to feed them to get them up to that 13-inch size in October. So it gives us a chance to kind of get in there and do inventory and redistribute the fish around a little bit. So
interesting. I read that. Tell us a little bit more about that. So you stock the streams and rivers first with a little bit smaller fish, and then come back around. Is that just operationally, or what's the kind of reasoning for that?
That's been I'm pretty sure the theory behind that is, they want the biggest fish possible to go into reservoirs, because that's where something, where they want almost guaranteed survival of those when we put them in there. And the take on the streams are, at an 8 inch is probably going to do pretty well in the stream setting. There's not going to be a ton of fish, because typically, there's not a lot in there going to eat an 8 inch, it's going to eat an 8 inch muskie in the streams. And, that's the way we've done. That's kind of the path we followed ever since I've been here. It's always, use those 8 inchers. And 2, we're needing to get rid of them at that time to free up groceries for these others. Yeah. And I mean, it's just and it's been successful, and it's just a good plan in terms of reducing the number of mouths we had to feed. You've got a nice fish that does really well in our rivers and streams, and then reduce
Right.
reduce your density in some other ponds and grow your reservoir fish out to 13 inches. So that's just been the kind of operational standard. It's kind of what we ran with.
That makes sense. So that was awesome. I appreciate that. I think everyone's going to appreciate that. What I want to hear now a little bit is I know before I learned a little bit about how hatcheries worked, I was, how do I say it? Naive to how complicated they are. And I think in hearing you talk about them, it's shed light on that. Like literally every step of the process, something could go wrong that could ruin it, whether it's blue-green algae in the ponds, VHS, stressed out eggs, too big of fish, not electrofishing enough brood stock. So there's, I think that's just, it's not easy is what I'm hearing from you to end up with thousands of muskies. There's a lot of things that have to go right. And I guess if you could just talk a little bit about some other things that you've seen go wrong and how they can be avoided, learnings, that you guys have had, predation in the ponds, or if there's any other, like one or two of those examples that stick out. I think those are good to hear, because I think we run into some of those as well up here.
Yeah. The biggest thing with production is adaptability, just being able to kind of shoot from the hip, when stuff goes wrong, and make on site, just go with your gut, do it. Let's try this or whatever. And we've been really good at doing that, not sitting and trying to overanalyze things, just kind of go with it and do what feels right in terms, be it wrong, be it right. And, at the end of the day, this is not a whole lot different than raising row crops or a crop of anything. You have years that are just, we literally have fish running out our ears, that everything just hits and does really, really good. And we can't really explain it, which is just, I don't really know, but everything's really, really good this year. Then you have years where it doesn't seem like you can get any kind of survival. The COVID 2020 year was just, they wouldn't let us get around one another. We didn't spawn fish because of social distance and stuff. So even after the fact, it was early May, and I ran to the river and we were shocking up fish. I found 2 actively flowing females over here in the river, and we brought them back. We grabbed some males, and we were unsuccessful. The eggs ended up being overripe. They weren't really good. But we tried once they cleared us that we could. So, there's a lot of factors in there. As far as predation goes, man, I'm telling you, it is so hard to keep the birds out of these things, like you wouldn't believe. Like when the herons, when they find them, they just live there, and this year we had an osprey in one of her ponds here, or grow out ponds, 13 inches. Dude, I mean, he just absolutely, I believe every time I saw him, he had a muskie. And, you shoot bird bangers and try to run them off, but it's...
We can't use ones that are... Can you guys shoot them, or what do you do to...
We have a depredation permit here. Certain species are on it. Ospreys are not on our list, unfortunately, but some of the others are, and and that we use that. It's kind of a last ditch effort. We try to eliminate, and save all we can. It's just one of those. It's just frustrating to see something you've kind of nurtured all year and be sitting there getting picked off by herons and cormorants and everything else, So, but we do try to take care of those especially if we can. So, but
sure,
that's always going to be a challenge.
Yep, always, everywhere. Birds like fish. I guess before we kind of change gears, and I know Josh has a really good direction he's going to take this with kind of the angling tactics. But before we change gears into that, what would, as looking at the future of the hatchery and where you guys can get support from the angling community, what would be some of those things if you had a magic wand to speak to the angling community, whether it's like the Daniel Boone Muskies Inc. or just the muskie world that cares about cave run and Kentucky muskies? What are areas that we as anglers?
Yeah, I would go, depending on the avenues. I'm not sure. We're good right now in terms of budget things with minnows and being able to feed those. But, who knows what next year brings, and the next year and the next year. That's probably my biggest concern where we're at. I think we're we're pretty good in all other areas, but just being able to feed these, we got to have minnows, to produce these bigger muskie, to be able to stock out. So that could be something, and I don't know if we're going to talk about research projects or anything. There's always room for research, with some grad students and stuff coming in. There's a couple things that I think would be really cool to look at, and not necessarily production wise, but just muskie wise in general would be pretty neat. A lot of states are doing some really cool stuff right now. And, Kentucky, we've not done any really cool. We've done some fin clipping projects and stuff, but there's some other stuff I think could be done that there may be demands for in terms of research dollars, in the upcoming future. But
sweet. What are some of those ideas? You got me excited now.
Stuff that I have in my mind, I would kind of like to see a telemetry study done to see how many fish we lose out of these reservoirs. Because there's periods of I pick up a lot of fish in the tailwater over here that are clip fish, and they come from the lake. Like 2 years ago, we had a lot of high discharge, and I picked up 8 or 9 fin clip fish, and those were fish that were in Cave Run. And those are just out of the 20 something that I picked up over here. 8 or 9 of them. I don't remember. I didn't I should have recorded that data, but a bunch of them were noticeably clipped, which none of the fish we stock in the rivers are clipped. We do clip all the fish that go in our reservoir, so we know we lose a lot of fish. In these tailwater and these high discharge times, they pass through these dams. And it would kind of be interesting to do a telemetry project and see, how many are we losing, and just to be able to know, because that could affect your stocking densities. That may warrant upping your stocking density. Stocking numbers. I'm not sure, but where that could go. But I think it would be a really neat study. And another thing that would be useful in terms of an agency talking about muskie would be just a diet study. Everybody, it's the age-old thing with muskie, man. Everybody said, oh, muskie have eaten all the crappie, or muskie are eating all the, and it would be cool to have the data to back up what most of us already know, that, hey, they're eating a very small percentage of your sport fish, but it would be cool to have that, to say, hey, we
Look
did.
At all these humans.
Yeah.
Look at all these humans spending their entire life catching muskies that never eat. They don't eat that much. Yeah, no, that'd be sweet though. Yeah, that would be sweet. Especially like you said, it's not just a walleye problem. It's usually, I think, a cultural, like anything I'm fishing for, muskies are eating. And also the telemetry study is cool because you guys, it feels like, without knowing the details, it feels like the dam and the cave run, like the spillway, it sets up pretty nicely to monitor them as they move through that. It's kind of like a choke point.
Yeah, you could put a remote unit down there that would mark every time a transmitter goes by it pings and lets you know that, hey, a fish has exited your area, so you could get an exact number of how many fish are going by that right there in the spillway. It would be kind of cool just to see, because all of our musky lakes or reservoirs here in the state are flood control reservoirs. They're you have Cave Run, you have Green River, and you have Buckhorn and Dewey Lakes. Those are the 4. And, you have periods of especially in Buckhorn and Cave Run and Green, you have periods of some pretty serious discharge, which makes really, it just kind of be interesting to see how many fish you lose, out of a reservoir.
Right. Very, very interesting. Well, cool, man. I appreciate that. And I think on behalf of the muskie world that is very happy to have a place like Cave Run, if things ever do look like, you need more minnows, you need more anti-predation systems, I think, definitely reach out to us. And I think the muskie world is definitely interested in helping out when the need arises. Let's talk about fishing though. Unless there is any, Scott, I'll actually, before we go that direction, anything else on the hatchery, Kentucky muskies, the Cave Run fishery that you wanted to kind of throw out there for the audience? Otherwise, I think we'll kind of change gears.
Did we talk growth rates of our fish versus your guys' fish? Did we do that?
No, hit that. That'd be great.
That it's pretty cool. for example, and this kind of goes back to our length limits in Kentucky versus your guys typically have some really large length limits in terms of keeping fish. But in Cave Run, for example, a 30-inch fish is 3 years old. So you guys, like up in Wisconsin, it's potentially 6, maybe 7 years old if the data I looked at's correct. So it's pretty crazy growth rates on the front end of their life. But it varies even more in Kentucky. So you take a fish that's 30 inches in one of our streams is typically around 5 years old, which is, you look at that. And that kind of helps explain, 40-inch reservoir size limit or statewide limit on all of our rivers and streams is a 30-inch minimum. So, slower growth rates, that kind of defends that length limit, which is kind of neat. And it also depends on sex in terms of like a 40-inch female out of Cave Run Lake is 6 years old. It takes, whereas in Wisconsin, you're looking at 11, maybe 12 years old fish to get 40 inches. So we have, and that's on a female. You're not going to hardly find a male down here over 40 inches. The biggest male I've seen in all the males I picked up electrofishing was 42 inches. And it was like this beat up old, warrior of a male. I mean, just gnarly looking dude, So typically your males are sub 40 inches. You hardly ever find one over 40. But that's just touch on growth rates in terms of, Wisconsin versus Kentucky. So.
What do you think contributes to that? And I ask that because I know there's a lot of armchair biologists out there, and I'm definitely fall victim to that once in a while. Where they talk about genetics and forage and environment and no matter what, they're just not going to grow that fast because of what strain they are. And how do you guys interpret some of that data?
They're obviously different strains. So that could possibly play a factor, but my thing is temperature. We have a little longer growing period and stuff, and that's your answer there in terms of here. Here a fish may live to be 15 years, whereas you guys have fish that are going to live 20 plus years up there. And on the back end, your guys' fish are probably going to get bigger than ours. When you compare records and overall size at the end of the day, because your fish are able to grow longer, and live a longer life in terms of just. Or
we're just got better liars, Scott. We're just better liars, maybe.
I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So.
But interesting. So they grow faster, but maybe not as big.
Yeah.
Live shorter lives.
That's it.
Interesting.
Dang.
Very cool. Josh, you wanna take us to the next chapter?
I'm still blown away that a 40-inch female can get that big in just 6 years.
Yeah, that's not.
Man.
Yeah, we have. I mean, thinking of that. Your favorite spot in the world, and there's 10-year-old 32-inchers in there.
Yep.
That are just hanging out, haven't grown really much at all.
Yep. Well, Scott, to segue us back to fishing here, you obviously come from a pretty long-lasting background of fisheries biologist. So you've hung out with these fish for a very long time. You know the ins and outs of all of their behaviors and patterns and stuff like that. Is there anything you can share us anglers that would give us a little edge when hunting these muskies down, both for river tactics and also lakes and reservoir tactics?
Yeah, I'm a river guy. I'm a river rat. That's what I grew up doing. Skinnier the water, the better for me. That's where I kind of shine in terms of muskie fishing, and that's where I tend when people ask me like, "Hey man, where can I go catch a muskie?" I'm like, "Dude, get in the river." If you want to catch one, and it's just the simple fact of it's a high percentage place that you're going to get your bait, whatever you're fishing with, whatever kind of tackle in front of one. And if you're good at reading trout water or smallmouth water, you can read musky water in terms of the rivers we have here, especially the tailwater systems. And I've had guys tell me they come to the spillway and they're dumping 3,500 CFS out over here, just dumping water like crazy. And they pull up to it and they look at it like, man, it's too much water. Now, dude, that's perfect because that puts fish where you can catch them. You know where they're at. It puts them in the eddies. I've ran a shocking boat over here for this will be my 17th season running a shocking boat over here. I can tell you exactly wherever they're in high periods of flow. I don't even have to turn it on until I get there. I know where they are, and it's same. It relays over, and it's the same kind of places you guys would be like, man, that little current break right there, it looks good. There should be a fish there, and there probably is. I mean, that's when I like to go. I like high flow, eddies, any kind of current break situation. It puts the fish on the bank. They're not out in the middle typically. It puts them up in these little feeder creeks. That's my bread and butter. I love real high flow, get back to feeder creeks. It's where all the shad, all the suckers and everything are, and the muskies follow them. A little warmer water, they pull up in there this time of year from now until the spawn. That's the juice. That's where they're at. But it's
make it down there.
I guess that would be my hot tip. Don't be afraid of high water. Do not let that intimidate you at all, especially on muskies down here in our area. And that carries over not just the Licking River, but that carries over to the other river systems that we have muskie in as well. So,
how about low water conditions, Scott? We've been experiencing what some people are calling a 20-year drought now, so we're in about the third or fourth year in that. Have you found any patterns tracking down muskies in lower water conditions in rivers and streams?
Deeper pools, deeper shady, deeper banks with some wood cover. That's one of the big things that I've noticed, like in the Licking, for example. You got a nice deep tree on a deep undercut bank with some shade. There's going to be a muskie in it most of the time. It's like they disappear from some of the shallower stuff in those low water times and search out these deeper, cooler holes. I can take you in the river I grew up in the summertime. I can show you, I can tell you where fish is going to be, and it's the same habitat every time. It's just like, it's not the same fish, but I've raised fish off the same little area multiple times, year after year. It's not the same one. So you're sitting there looking at that, and why is that fish like that? And there's something about it that they like, and the common trend to all that is typically those deeper, slower, shady pools with some wood in it, and that's where I find them in the summertime, low water periods and stuff. So,
okay,
man, he's getting me excited. You got to make it down there, man. I know it's the wildest, coolest musky fishery I've seen.
Let's go.
It's different. The dam that they have is like the craziest place ever. And these rivers and creeks, they're just so cool. So yeah, we're getting jacked.
Yeah,
Scott.
Are you guys coming down for the Kentucky River deal, the tournament up on the Kentucky fishing tournament?
We're not this year because we have a conflict, but you can bet your bottom dollar we will be down there. So Dave had hit me up. We're sponsoring it. We're pumped to see it. Like I'm the biggest fan that there's another muskie tournament, especially in spring and especially in a different area.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to be sweet. We'll be down there, and then we're not going to make down to Cave Run this year, I don't think. But that place it's been on my list. But tell you interesting segue a little bit. You said you grew up on the Kentucky River.
Mm-hmm.
I know there'll be some folks fishing. Are you fishing the tournament, by the way?
I'm not. I'm going to go up and actually fish. I didn't have another partner that was a fly fishing guy, so I'm going to go up and fish Saturday, just solo amigo, just for fun. And then I'm going to be there. I plan to be there Saturday evening when everybody gets together there at Cliffview, there in Campton. So my plan is to be around. And so if anybody's out there listening, I'll be there. If you got any questions or whatever, I'd be more than happy to try to answer whatever, when I'm there at the dinner on Saturday night. But I'm going to come down and fish just for fun. If the water cooperates and it doesn't get blown out. Hopefully it doesn't get blown out, push everybody to the lakes and stuff. But I'd like to see what.
I think that'll be disappointing for the people attending. I think there's a bunch of river rats. And I was going to ask you what your tips would be for folks fishing it, but maybe I won't ask you that now because you're going to be down there doing some fishing yourself. Maybe the hot tip is
it kind of comes down to access. The most public access is on the South Fork of the Kentucky, which is where I grew up. There's several boat ramps on it, which is a great river. There's not a bad spot. There's not a bad stretch on the river. this time of year, any of your deeper pools and stuff, kind of like what we're talking, same kind of deal. Those deeper stretches seem to be where the muskie are, especially February. They're not, they're not going to really start moving yet a whole lot, but it'll be awesome. I mean, a lot of good access there. Bigger fish, in my opinion, probably in the Middle Fork of the Kentucky River, just from fishing experience. You got fish coming out of Buckhorn in that system. Access is going to be difficult there. There's not a lot of public access. Maybe you can find a local that'll give you permission to slide in somewhere. There's some, county roads that are close by that you can slide in and fish, but probably bigger fish there, to be honest. North Fork's got some nice fish in it too. There are a couple ramps on it up around the Jackson area and downstream there. But it's good. A lot of those trips, the creeks to those rivers are really good. Higher numbers of fish in some of those, in my opinion. They're not as big, but more fish.
Good for well, that's good advice, man. If folks are listening, I know a few of them are. This will come out before the tournament. Some hot tips from the man that grew up on the river. What else was I gonna? Oh, you kind of indicated it, but if you had to recommend to folks, I think everybody, if you consider yourself a musky angler, you need to get down to Moorhead. Check out the Hatchery. Get to meet Scott. Go fish Cave Run. Go fish the river. What would you recommend? Best time for a big one? Best time for action to come down?
Well, that's funny. I got the krill data right here for 2019. The best
You're
month.
the right guy.
Yeah, the best months according to our krill in 2019 were April, May, and October in terms of catches. The highest catch rate for Cave Run was in September that year. And, that's not always the case. It can vary depending on, weather fronts and other things. But those are your better months typically for according to the krill. And then just all the fishermen and the folks I know, that kind of hits the nail on the head there. That's probably your better months in terms of when to come cave run and fish. So, it's really good in the fall. A lot of folks are on the main lakes on weeds and stuff. And, musky fishing here is just such a great thing for the whole Moorhead community and tourism wise. You got the PMTT here in the spring, which is just amazing. I mean, that's this is one of only 2-3 bodies of water in the whole state that host a national tournament, and the other one being Lake Cumberland, and then you got Kentucky and Barkley Lake, and those are bass related. But it's really cool to have that kind of claim to fame here, and hopefully we can keep that going for a long time. Does a lot for the community, and it's really, really good tourism wise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's at the end of the day, like the puzzle of this whole thing is we want to have better fishing, but this is an economic, there's an economic reason that, why the hatchery still gets money to make fish, and we have the same challenges up here. Kind of a different angle. Kind of related to that, how have you seen fly fishing gain, or what's the state of musky fly fishing down in Kentucky? Like, if you were to go pull 10 musky anglers down there, is one of them a fly angler, or a little bit less than that even?
I can think of several folks I've seen around the area that are fly anglers. I think that whole community's really booming right now. I think it's really cool to see the breakdown of your musky anglers. I put them in kind of 3 groups. You have your guys that have the bigger boats that are reservoir guys. It's kind of like, the musky culture up there where you are, and they stay on the lakes. Then you have your bank and river guys that are fishing, beating the bank, walking, smaller boats and stuff, and then you've got your fly guys, kind of coming in now, and it's really cool to see. It's really cool to see that whole thing kind of taking off, and it's cool. I can't say enough good things about it, because the good thing about all the fly guys are very all you guys are resource oriented, and your number one priority is just taking care of the fish, and just the challenge of catching one on a fly. That says a whole lot. You're not out there with a thing of treble hooks smacking them in the face. It's pretty cool deal. But it's growing. I feel like it's gaining a lot of treadway, and then things like this tournament that are coming up and stuff, that's not going to do anything but just build it and keep it snowballing, hopefully. So there's more folks we got, the better.
Mhm.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Any closing thoughts, fellas? This has been sweet. We covered a lot of ground.
This has been a fascinating episode.
Yeah,
I've learned so much.
Many more questions, but my little alarm goes off after an hour because now I'm starting to eat into your day. But anything else you wanted to share with us, Scott? Man, this is sweet.
Come down and check us out. Come fishing. We've got 4 reservoirs and a ton of streams. And if you're thinking about planning a trip or something, don't hesitate to reach out to the biologist for that particular district. Shoot them an email, give them a phone call, and they can help you with access points and like, hey, what kind of craft I need to fish this or whatever. They should be able to point you in the right direction. We're here to help, and don't ever hesitate and not reach out and shoot an email to somebody and ask questions if you need some help with something, and we'll try to point you in the right direction because we want you to be successful and utilize a resource, especially in some of our skinnier water, that it's kind of untapped. You got a few locals using it, but not a lot of other folks are really gaining access to it. So be really good. Just come on down.
Hell yeah. And likewise to you, fella. You ever find yourself getting an itch to come up to Wisconsin, you got an open invite in both of our boats. We'd love to have you up.
Right on. I've fished Wisconsin some. I love it up there. So I'd like to make it back up there. But
good.
Sounds good. Appreciate y'all having me on.
What's that?
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely, man.
Our pleasure.
It all started with that invite down to the hatchery, which was like made our trip. So it was more muskies than we saw on Cave Run that week. So
for sure.
You were the only one that muskies.
That's right. Too bad they were a little bigger, but you got to see some anyway. So
yeah, that's right. That's all right. Well, hey folks, this has been another good episode, Spot Burn Podcast. We got Scott Barrett from the Minor E. Clark Fish Hatchery in Moorhead on Cave Run Lake, the musky capital of the South. Big thank you for him joining us. Big thank you to everybody tuning in and our sponsors, Cortland, Stealthcraft Boats. Always a pleasure. Until next time, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Spot Burn Podcast. Coming to you from the dungeon, this podcast is presented by Musky Fool Fly Fishing Co. We want to thank our awesome sponsors, Cortland Line Company and Stealthcraft Boats. We also want to thank all of you, our listeners, for tuning in, subscribing, sharing, and spreading the good word. If you haven't heard, go check us out at muskyfool.com. Have fun out there on the water, y'all.